Good morning, grade 10s. Let's begin our last lesson of our ecosystems unit. So we are just about finished. What that means is that we're going to have a quiz coming up soon to cap off the unit. It'll be a Google form. Generally, when I do this quiz in class, it's all multiple choice. So the Google form will work perfectly for that. What I will do is I will assign it for you on Friday, and you'll have the weekend to complete it. It'll be due on Monday. Okay, so you'll have a few days to do it. That means that today being Tuesday, that tomorrow, Wednesday, I will post an ecosystems unit review, and you can work on that. And then you can work on that on Thursday when I have parent-teacher phone calls, and then on Friday, you'll start your quiz. So just a reminder that if you wanted to be caught up from what we've done for ecosystems online so far, you need to have completed the online ecosystems assignment number 1. That was the one that was all about populations and cycles. And then you need to have completed the Planet Earth question sheet when we watched that episode of Cities, Planet Earth 2. And then you need to have completed the Save My Lake video response worksheet. So that's 3 things that we've done in ecosystems. If you haven't done all 3 of those, you are technically missing some work. So I'd love for you to be able to get that in. But that being said, let's move on to our last lesson for the day, which is going to be about ecosystem services and the importance of biodiversity in an ecosystem. In this lesson, we get into a little bit more we just dive a little bit deeper into the impact that humans have on ecosystems, on climate, and what sort of effect that has on what an ecosystem can do for us and what it'll look like in the future. So kind of following that same theme of being, conscious about the way that we are treating our ecosystem and the effect that humans as a species can have on it. So let's jump right into it. It's no secret that as humans, we all depend on the systems that Earth provides for us, including its ecosystems. We rely on it for resources like water, for food, for our shelter, for our clothing, for energy. All of these things are provided by the Earth and its ecosystems for us. In some societies, most often Western societies, including North America and Europe, lots of people historically have taken the attitude that all of these resources that we rely on are endless and that humans could use them without limit forever with no side effects or harm to the environment. Now, while this was happening for a long, long time, there were some scientists along the way and early environmentalists that did try to challenge this attitude, saying that no, we're not going to be able to continue to live like this and have endless supplies of resources because nothing, there's no source of energy that's infinite on the planet in the sense that the way that we were using it with, crude oils and such. So their warnings initially were largely dismissed or ignored. But then between the 1940s and the 1960s, environmental scientists began writing more and more about how humans were overusing, overexploiting the resources for which we all depend on for our very survival. So this became less of just like an idea or a theory and became more and more something that was being tested, being studied, and being proven scientifically that it was actually occurring. So since then, scientists have been conducting studies and collecting data to better understand how ecosystems function, how they're connected to one another, and how they're affected by human activities. And then finally, with the goal of studying how humans can, in the end, reduce our impact that we have on them. Because we need to kind of go a route of having a more sustainable approach, like we talked about in our earlier lessons, in order to keep those services from being completely depleted. So first off, before we get into some of the more deeper notes about what it is that we can do to reduce our impact on them, let's talk about what an actual ecosystem service is. So an ecosystem service is the benefit that sustainable ecosystems provide that are experienced by the living organisms within it. And actually, you know what? It doesn't even have to be within it, because we sometimes have ecosystem services from ecosystems that we're not even living in, right? Like in the winter in Canada, we get fruit from ecosystems that are producing fruit, where we couldn't have that in Canada because it would be too cold. So all the living organisms that benefit from these ecosystems, including humans, they're all going to benefit from the ecosystem services that they provide. So these services are the natural result of all the activities that occur within the biosphere. Without sustainable ecosystems, Earth would lose most of those services that they provide for us. Obviously not a good thing. Here's some examples of the services that they provide. And just imagine these not being around anymore. Obviously, it would be really, really bad. So, for example, forests, they absorb a lot of CO2 and they release a lot of oxygen. That's obviously really important for our carbon and oxygen cycles. They maintain soil fertility. There's nutrient cycles within the soil and within the soil and the forests, and it's carbon cycles, nitrogen cycles, phosphorus cycles, and this is helps with our balance of the processes of growth as well as decomposition. Obviously, they provide habitats, right? They provide habitats for 2 million known species, and probably many, many, many more. And then also, finally, in kind of a less qualitative sense, they are a source of beauty and spirituality for many people and many different communities. Um, Continued, let's go through some more. They provide humans with food. They provide us with fossil fuels to be able to get energy. They provide us with timber to be able to build shelter. Many of our medicines are derived from plants that we can find within ecosystems. They maintain populations of organisms that are necessary for us to consume, like I said, food, but also for pest control. So to have a control on the limit of insects, but then also you want to have enough insects because you want there to be pollination, waste management, and other, almost countless other processes that we benefit from. So as you can see, there's a large number of ecosystem services that we rely on to be able to live life the way that we do. Let's talk about a few different specific ecosystem services. We'll start with forests. The world's forests absorb about 1/3 of the carbon dioxide that's released into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide absorption and then obviously oxygen O2 release is a very, very important ecosystem service that forests supply for us, because we need to limit the amount of carbon dioxide that's being emitted into our atmosphere, obviously, and then also having oxygen is very important for us to be able to continue to live, as well as all other animals. So, or all other mammals. Forests also help maintain soil and nutrients in the soil because the plants and tree roots will keep the soil from eroding and washing away. So a couple smaller kind of secondary ones. The main one for forests is that CO2 absorption and the O2 release. And obviously just providing a place for a lot of animals to live. Wetlands. Wetlands are sometimes referred to as the Earth's kidneys because they are the ones that filter sediment and pollutants that are coming in from the water so that they don't get into the habitats of lots of species as well as into the soil or into the agriculture around it. Wetlands store water, reducing the risks of floods. They store carbon. A lot of carbon is stored within wetlands, which reduces its impact on the climate change and provides habitat for fish and for game. And then they provide migrating birds with a place to rest and feed. A lot of birds that migrate from north down to the south will go to wetlands. Insects. This is one that is easily overlooked because we think of insects, we don't think of them as being very useful, but a lot of insects provide really important ecosystem services as well. Insects, especially bees, provide the essential service of pollination. So without insects as pollinators, we would not have all the plants and fruits and vegetables that we need. That's just a well-known fact. We need them to be able to pollinate for us. I'll post a video inside of the link that I share with you for your daily post that you can watch that talks about the mysterious disappearance or reducing population of the bees that's occurring right now, and what kind of effect that's going to have on us, what kind of effect it could have on us. And the reason I say that is because right here below, it's estimated that the commercial value of crop pollination services by bees and by insects is estimated to be, well, sorry, crop pollination in general, commercial crop pollination is estimated to be $1.2 billion per year in Canada alone. So it's really, really important for our agriculture, and insects are a huge part of that. So connectivity. Ecosystems are not usually a defined space, like for example, like a country or a province with an actual border. They usually overlap into one another and a little bit more connected than that. Now, they can overlap into one another. That's probably the most common, but another way that ecosystems can be connected is that they can be linked together even if they're not overlapping, even if they're not touching geographically. So if they're separated geographically, they can be linked together, and we call that connectivity. Try to think right now about how do ecosystems link to one another, even if they're separated geographically. You can pause the video and try to think of your answer, but it's migration is the answer. So an example of connectivity is migratory songbirds, or birds that live in Canada in the spring and summer, and then will travel to South America for the fall and winter. Several of these species have populations on the decline, and this is because a lot of these birds would choose to live in forests in South America in the winter, but many of these forests are being clear cut for the farming of coffee or for cattle farming or for commercial development, like condominiums and stuff like that. So Canadian and South American ecosystems are connected to one another, even though we're separated geographically. We have birds, or as populations of birds that rely on both of those ecosystems. So the ecosystems therefore rely on one another. So that's connectivity. Let's talk about biodiversity. Earth has about 2 million known species, but it's estimated that there are actually between 5 and 100 million species actually on Earth. Biodiversity includes what it is the number and variety of organisms found in a specific region, as well as the number and variety of ecosystems within and beyond that region. So it has to do with how many and how much variety there is of organisms found within a specific ecosystem, and then how many and the variety of ecosystems found within a larger region. Now, biodiversity is extremely important because an ecosystem that has a greater biodiversity will be a lot more likely to be able to provide important services at a reliable rate. So, like we were talking about in the past, it means that they'll be more sustainable and more resilient. So that's what I say right here, is that it's believed that this kind of ecosystem will exhibit more resilience, which is that ecosystem's ability to maintain balance even in the face of significant outside disturbances. So think Australia earlier this year with the wildfires that were going on. Australia has a really, really strong biodiversity, which will help its ecosystem to be able to bounce back from those wildfires better than it would if humans had kind of affected that biodiversity in a negative way prior to that. So biodiversity, how could humans affect that biodiversity is probably what we should talk about next. And that's going to be our last couple slides here, is that biodiversity is under attack in the following 4 ways. Okay. The first way is deforestation. This is the practice of clearing forests for other human uses and then never replanting them. So it's one thing to clear a forest and then replant it and use that lumber or that timber for paper, and then to actually replant it will have an effect on the ecosystem, but it will be able to bounce back eventually. But when we clear those forests and then end up using them for something entirely different, that's really a really negative effect on the biodiversity of that region. The second is draining wetlands. This is often done so that the land can be used for development or for agriculture, or sometimes it's even done for reasons as to reduce mosquito populations as well, because they lay their eggs inside of water inside of the water that it would be there. And so in order to reduce the mosquito population, sometimes we drain wetlands or marshes and stuff like that. Number 3, alien species. This is a species that is accidentally or deliberately introduced into a new location. If you were watching the excuse me, if you were watching the cities episode of Planet Earth 2 that I assigned for you to watch, you could probably think of an alien species that they had a really, really strong example for inside of that episode, and it was the catfish inside of the Seine River. Initially introduced there for sport, for them to be able to fish and catch them, and for humans to be able to do that. But then with no known natural predator, remember what happens to a population if we have no predators and no competition. Populations want to expand or grow exponentially, right? And that's what happened with the catfish population inside of that river. Could have realistically never been there, and now there's almost too many of them to be able to control. And then what that ends up doing is throwing off the whole balance of that ecosystem itself, because they will now have be competing with their large population with all the other fish for the food that is there. And then you saw in that video, they ended up actually hunting pigeons as they were on the ground there, because there is a lack of, they're going to eat whatever they can, right? Another example that's a little bit closer to home is zebra mussels. If you have a cabin in somewhere, that's near a lake, you'll probably see warnings and signs for if you're transferring your boat between 2 different lakes, clean it off properly, because you can help prevent the spread of the alien species, zebra mussels, which have no known predator here as well. So their population is exponentially growing. Now, sometimes these species become invasive species, which means that they can take over the habitat of the native species which are already there. Now, that doesn't always happen, so that's why I've bolded the word sometimes there. So don't always think that an alien species that's introduced either accidentally or deliberately into a new location is always invasive. It only happens some of the time. And then the last one, number 4, is overexploitation. This is the use or extraction of a resource until it is completely depleted or depleted to the point of no return. So this is the 4th way that we can affect biodiversity. If we use up all of a certain resource, then it's obviously just going to cease to exist and will affect the biodiversity of an ecosystem or various ecosystems, as we talked about earlier with connectivity. So that is it for our biodiversity and ecosystem services notes, which means that we are finished. Just a review, we started off with a little unit intro to talk about what a population is. Then we moved on to sustainability and how populations are related to one another and connected to one another. Then we went into cycles, talked about carbon cycle, oxygen cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. And then we moved into eutrophication and biomagnification. And finally, we have finished off with ecosystem services and the importance of biodiversity. So that will be the topics that are covered on your quiz. And a reminder that your quiz will be on Friday. If you have any questions on your review, obviously just email me. I'll be posting it on the classroom for you tomorrow. So good luck with that, and I will talk to you later.